This is The Gauntlet, episode 98. I'm Rich.
I'm Lowell.
And I'm Jason.
Hey guys, so here we are at our monthly games roundup. Unfortunately, Kate's unable to join us. She has some family matters to take care of. We're thinking fondly of you, Kate. Let's, I'll kick it off this time around. I want to talk about, I played a number of games over the last month. Impulse Drive, which I talked about last episode of the games roundup. Time and Temp, which is a very cool game by Epidiah Ravachol. Monster Hearts 2, surprise, surprise, right? I'm a member of the Gauntlet, so I have to do that.
It's mandatory at this point, right?
it is totally, yeah, that's you give a little blood and you play a little Monster Hearts 2. Apocalypse World, Masks, because, you know, that's all I do is PBTA. But wait, there's also Wolf Spell, because I'm on an Epi kick. And a game called Magnum Fury, which is a pretty neat little game that I played with Andrea and some other folks. But the game I wanted to discuss is Breakers. Now, Breakers is one of John Harper's Patreon, I'm going with Patreon releases. He released it back in September of last year, and he described it as World of Dungeons Turbo. It's a 4-page game, and the 4th page is mostly patrons being thanked.
Nice.
It is a tight design. The pitch for this game is what sold me. Here, I'm just going to do the intro paragraph. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah,
I have to.
Go ahead.
The magical realm of Kirax has collided with Earth, shearing the dimensions and creating a mashed-up borderland between our reality and the monster-infested domain of the wizard Kai Shirakai. You play working-class heroes who explore the twisted break, seeking fame and fortune. But don't stay too long, or the cloud of woe will surely find you. The gist of Breakers is kind of a little bit Ghostbusters, a little bit of Ash from the Evil Dead, a little bit of Hellboy.
I was getting that vibe. Yeah, that comes across in that little...
It's super that. So you play regular folks, or you can play a weird person, and you have to deal with effectively dungeons that are thrown into our modern day. And the cool part is you get paid by FEMA. Which I think is kind of
That's great.
There's a timing element to it, which is that cloud of woe. It's a countdown clock. And that countdown clock, you can advance it as the GM at your whim or whenever they stop to take rest. It plays like a normal World of Dungeons kind of game. You have 3 stats, and levels are gained by the number of delves that you've done, effectively. So it's a really tight design. Like I said, it's 3 pages, 1.5 of which are stuff for the GM, like suggestions for monsters and ideas there. And there's a lot in there. It's a rich game. It is as complex as Ghostlines or World of Dungeons itself. This was my first time running World of Dungeons. I played it when my son wanted to run World of Dungeons for his classmates, and so that was my experience with World of Dungeons. But hey, it's PBTA, right? No. No, it's not just PBTA. So I love the idea of it. The characters that we had sat down, Strash Chimovic joined our group, ran this Saturday Morning Cartoons, Keith Stetson, and then Pavel, who's played in a number of games with me recently, Spirit of 77, Apocalypse World, and the like. And also Vince, who has joined us on some recent stuff. He played 7C with us, right. Lowell, if you remember.
And, he was in Gumshoe game, too.
Having Strash along was a little intimidating, seeing as how he plays with John Harper on Twitch and Adam Coble and the like. But it was great because he has a lot of experience. He'd run Breakers quite a bit. This was, if I recall, the first time he got to play. So that was fun. I really loved the characters, the storyline of it that we kind of interlaced between the sessions was good. The 4th session of 3, because one had to be canceled, we had a few people who had to drop out, scheduling issues, but the 4th session is this Saturday coming up. And while I enjoy all the trappings of it, to be honest with you, World of Dungeons asks more of you than I expected.
Yeah, it does.
It needs a certain amount of push and rigor that I'm not used to. And I'll be honest, and this could also be a fundamental misunderstanding of PBTA games as a whole on my part. But I often play in a semi-reactive mode as an MC. I wait for hard moves, or I wait for the players to kind of look at me, right? Those are my cues to come forward with fiction, questions, or a hard move.
Yeah.
Breakers is not built that way. This is a dungeon delve. For all of the cool trappings, right? You build a dungeon, and there's some looseness around finding gear and scrounging for stuff, because that's the reason you're there, right? You don't just want the FEMA paycheck. You really want to get some loot. But you need to push hard. You need to force them to use resources. It really is a very OSR feel, and I didn't get that until we got in and started playing. So first dungeon was pretty cool. I went with the idea that a Breakers team had kind of gone in, gotten most of the way through, and then failed. So they followed their breadcrumb of steps along the path, and that one went relatively well, mostly because I had a loose dungeon. I got worried about presenting the level of challenge from the first session to the second. So I reached out to my buddy Paul, editor of The Gauntlet, and I was freaking out. I'm like, dude, I don't know how to build a dungeon anymore. I have atrophied my dungeoning. And Paul worked with me, and okay, when I say work with me, he did most of the work of coming up with this super cool dungeon. It was really neat, and I felt like I had those training wheels on. But again, I'm waiting for them to effectively, I introduce a threat. There are some fast things that are coming at you. What do? No, I should have just hit them. I should have just started depleting their resources and hammering at them, taking hit points and just starting hammering at them. And it was a very interesting feedback session. The roses and thorns, there were a lot of very strong thorns of things that I can work on. And I'm hoping that I'll have a comeback. I'm going to be like Apollo Creed, right? At the end.
Right.
At the end of the fourth round, I'll come back. Wait, he died.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a wrong example. Yeah.
But your son gets to GM then later.
Exactly. So, I'm pushing through. I'm going to finish out the last session this Saturday. I feel like I know where my areas of opportunity are, and it gives me a good appraisal of, hey, not all the tools in my toolbox are sharp enough, and that was educational, right? That's a thing that I can work on. What are your thoughts? You've run a lot of World of Dungeons, Jason. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have played a lot of World of Dungeons. In fact, I run it at this point like once every couple months or so. I think I run a series of it. You're right. It is not the same thing as a normal Powered by the Apocalypse game. It requires a lot more GM effort. And I tend to run OSR modules in World of Dungeons. That's kind of how I use World of Dungeons. Mm-hmm. And even though those modules are prepared beforehand, you still have to read it and digest it and be ready to, react and add things in as needed, right? There are no moves to depend on, right, to drive the fiction, except for just the basic, high result, mid result, miss, right? I like it a lot though. I mean, it works for the way I like to prep, the way I like to explore different types of adventures and things that have kind of caught my eye, I really do have a fondness for OSR stuff, but I don't really care to play D&D, and so World of Dungeons it works for me. It's a good compromise. It allows me to get through a whole module in 2 or 3 sessions or 4 sessions, and enjoy it and get all the themes and get all the action and get all the gross, cool, awesome, metal shit that I want out of that module, while doing it in a system, in a more narrative focused system that I'm comfortable with, But yeah, there are no moves to rely on, right? That's why whenever people say you should start with World of Dungeons before you move to Dungeon World. No, that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. World of Dungeons is harder. It's the harder of the two. And no one ever believes me when I say that until they experience it. So I do like it though. I actually don't know anything about Breakers until just now. I haven't been keeping up with Breakers.
I think you would dig it. I think you really should consider
I bet I would.
Giving that a shot.
I bet I would. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of just real light systems lately. And World of Dungeons and Cthulhu Dark, which is what I'm going to talk about today, they're really doing it for me in that way,
It's interesting, Rich, because I remember when we were talking when I did Crow's Mantle and tried to build that as a very stripped down PBTA game, and then felt a lot of it didn't work. I wasn't sure where the energy was supposed to be. I wasn't sure what it was doing, and it kind of didn't function. But I think that was in part because I was trying to run a traditional approach when in fact it probably would have required something close to World of Dungeons.
Right.
When you mentioned it, the sense I got from your discussion is that the first session you were kind of happy with, and it was a second session that wasn't so strong?
I think everybody was still testing it out first session, and second session was when really you should take it to the next level, and I didn't take it to the next level. So I think first session I wasn't aware of it being bad. Second session I had enough knowledge to know that maybe first session also was bad, but I still had those good feelings to mask over it.
Well, and
if that makes sense.
I should say that, like, I don't tend to grab, like, when I'm running World of Dungeons, I don't tend to run a dungeon crawl. Like, a lot of the OSR modules, especially like the ones that come out of Lamentations, for example, they're not necessarily dungeon crawls. They're usually more like just filled with big set pieces and like kind of weird encounters, you know? And so I think it actually, World of Dungeons works pretty well for a sort of D&D oriented adventure, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like we're moving from room to room, right? I think it probably works fine in that context also, but I think that the system can handle like, something that's pulled out a little bit from like a sort of per se dungeon crawl. But yeah, you have to be ready as a GM. You've got to be ready to like make this stuff happen. Like, I don't know if does Breakers have the Die of Fate rule that World of Dungeons has?
It does. It does.
That's a huge, for me, like it's in the World of Dungeons, it's almost a throwaway part of the rules. Like it's barely there, you know, like one sentence or whatever. And it seems like an afterthought even, but it actually drives a ton of the action, because the way I use it is essentially whenever the players encounter any brand new person, any brand new room, any brand new location, any kind of encounter at all, I roll the Die of Fate. I roll it publicly so they can all see it. And it basically shows the table as players, they know what the basic disposition of this encounter is going to be like, right? And I like it because I like to improv it, right? Like to me, it's fun. Like it's fun to say, okay, well, I know generally from the module what's going to happen, you know, here, but what happens if I roll high on the Die of Fate and it's just a really easy encounter? Like, what does that mean? Or what if I roll low and it's much harder than I thought it was going to be? What does that mean? And I think that appeals to me as a GM. Like, I like the challenge of that, you know, but again, like, I don't think I could do that if I hadn't like internalize the module in the way that I do before I run them.
Okay, cool.
Have you run DCC stuff with World of Dungeons, Jason?
I have, yeah. It works fine. Yeah, it works perfectly fine. I mean, you don't get the, you know, DCC has a few like really DCC specific bells and whistles that don't quite
magic is going to kill you.
Yeah. There's little things like that, like that don't quite come through the same in a system like World of Dungeons, but the basic like encounters and themes and motifs of the dungeon, that all works great.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks. And Jason, you mentioned Cthulhu Dark. Why don't you jump in? What games have you been playing?
I've had a great month of gaming, actually. It's been really, really fun. I am running Apocalypse World 2E and The Sprawl and Cthulhu Dark. I'm going to talk about Cthulhu Dark a little bit, but just real quick. Apocalypse World 2E, honestly, post-apoc stuff is not really my jam. I was determined to play Apocalypse World 2E. It's not really, I'm not there in the literature or in the movies. It's just not like in my wheelhouse. And so I had a little bit of like trepidation, like even running it. Like I've always felt that way. Of all the like big PBTA games, Apocalypse World, ironically, is the one that I've always felt most uncomfortable running, because I don't think it's really in my wheelhouse in terms of the themes. But this one's going great.
I'm surprised to hear that.
No, I don't run it that often, right? I mean, it's pretty rare. But this one's going okay because of the child thing, which is the new playbook.
Right.
Weird little feral supernatural kids that are like paranoid and see monsters everywhere. And like, it's a strange playbook, but David's playing the child thing and it just works great. It's working great for me. Like it adds a level of supernatural weirdness to affairs that helps me get to like a more comfortable place, you know, like, so we're in a more comfortable place, like this series of Apocalypse World than I probably would be without that like little extra bit of weirdness thrown in.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also got like a brainer in the group who's picked up a Skinner move, sympathetic brainer, not a jerk face evil brainer. So that's interesting. And yeah, it's a good game. The Sprawl's going great. We're doing it in a sort of like future New Orleans, which is really cool. Thinking about what it means for a cyberpunk New Orleans future is a lot of fun, lots of jazz and exploring different, themes of like social stratification and poverty and things like that. And then I'm playing in a game of Monster of the Week with community member Michael. Well, that's actually over. That's already ended, but fantastic.
Nice.
One of the very first games. It's definitely the first game that Michael's ever run for the Gauntlet. It's the first time he's ever run Monster of the Week. And I got the impression that he hasn't GM'd much at all, period. And so he knocked it out of the park. I mean, he just did a great job. He was collected. He was calm. He was managing the spotlight. Like he just like took to it really easily. And I was super impressed. Great fun. And then Cthulhu Dark. Sorry, that went on longer than I thought it was going to. I occasionally get like just a crazy idea. I get an idea. Like I want to do this thing. Like this is not something I was planning on like, a day ago, but now I want to do this thing. And I wanted to do Cthulhu Dark in old Hollywood. I was trying to add things to the calendar because I felt like the calendar was getting a little light. And I was like, you know what? I've got some time on Sundays, so I'm gonna add a game in on Sundays. And so I did a 3-session run. I put a 3-session run up of Cthulhu Dark. It's called Cthulhu Dark Confidential, which is an allusion to like Confidential magazine or like LA Confidential, the movie, right? Noir, Hollywood, 1920s, 1930s. That's kind of the vibe I'm going for. Put it up there, and I had a lot of fun prepping for these sessions. I actually haven't finished prepping the third one yet because it's not gone off yet. But the first two, it was really, really fun. I was really focused on like, what does it mean for a Lovecraftian mystery to take place in old Hollywood? I was really, really focused on that. I think it would have been easy to just, pick Hastur or Cthulhu or whatever out of a hat and then create a mystery that just happens to be set in old Hollywood, right? I think that would have been easy to do. But I really, really was like thinking about like when I'm watching like a movie about Hollywood, or when I'm thinking about Hollywood in terms of like its sort of pop culture cachet, like what does that mean to me? Like what do I find exciting about that? And so I landed on a couple of big themes, and I chose mythos monsters that I thought matched up with those themes pretty well. So for example, one of my big themes for the first one was this idea of people going to Hollywood to make it big, but they end up just being kind of victimized, right? Like that's a thing that like we kind of understand like in sort of popular imagination of Hollywood. Like I go there seeking out my dreams, but I end up just being like, it just ends up being like casting couches and porn, right? And so I liked that idea, and so I chose a mythos monster called Igolanak, which is connected, which is like connected to like sexual perversion and pornography and things like that. And I built the mystery around that, and I told the table up front, I want to go with a really kind of sexually perverse, gross thing. That's what I want, and it was great. And then the second one, I was like, okay, well, what's another theme? Well, the idea of movies as a dreamscape, right? Like we look at movies and we're transported to another world. Like that was my theme. And so then I chose this spider mythos monster, which is called Atlaknaka, which is building a web between the waking world and the dreamlands, right? And it was just great fun. I mean, I really, really think that like extra bit of time I sat and thought really hard about the themes of my sessions, I think paid off in spades. Like I think it was a big, big payoff. Like it just felt super coherent. Like from point A to point B, to the beginning of the mystery until the end, it felt like a complete thing. And I was really, really proud of it. I don't normally like feel super proud of like my stories, but I really love these. So yeah, that was just kind of what I wanted to talk about. I mean, there's something to be said about like, I don't know if it's going an extra step, but maybe it's like approaching adventure creation from a slightly different angle or perspective, I guess.
A thematic, yeah.
Like a thematic approach, yeah. And I try to do like little things to sort of make it like a special experience for the people who show up, So I, in both the two mysteries we've run, I had 2 set pieces that were basically identical in both mysteries. Like the mysteries are separate from each other. They have different characters and everything, right? Different stories. But I created these 2 set pieces that basically mirrored each other in both the mysteries, and they will be in the third one as well. One was like this set piece in this movie theater called the Purple Crown, And this other was like this set piece that took place in like a ranch, like just outside of Los Angeles. And I tried to like mirror the things that took place in each session. Like, I mirrored them together, but like through this different lens. Like one was through the lens of like this monster and pornography, and the other was this lens through like surrealistic dreamscape, and I knew the players loved it. Like there was so much conversation about it afterwards. Like the players just like really were into into that, they were into this, and they were all just so game, like really good. They just totally embraced the themes. They played their characters great. Yeah, these sessions of Cthulhu Dark have been the business. I've just been really, really super satisfied.
Sounds very Lynchian, sort of Mulholland Drive. I like that.
The second one especially.
Yeah.
The second one especially was real Lynchian. I mean, Hollywood is a theme that Lynch deals with anyway a lot, right? Like that's one of his big, themes. And so I drew on that for sure. But yeah, great fun. I don't have anything else to say about it except that I feel like I want to, there's a part of me that feels this burning desire to like I want to talk with other people about like how they design their mysteries and like learn what their process is, and like how they approach it and how they think about it. And I'm just really in that headspace right now,
I actually want to mention a related piece. There's actually a really interesting Trail of Cthulhu collection that isn't Cthulhu at all. It's called Shadows Over Filmland. And what they do for that one is they take like all the classic monster movies.
Oh, nice.
And they do a scenario that sort of feels like that. And they've got some stuff about creating that feel of kind of backlot Hollywood. And it's a series of mysteries. They're completely separate. The last mystery of it is a meta one where you actually go to Hollywood and the film that they're making is your earlier stories.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, I like that. That's good.
It's a really good collection worth looking at for using beyond, obviously, Trail of Cthulhu.
Something I did in the second session was I even had like recurring NPCs, but their motivation and their like sort of their frame of like reference of understanding what was going on was like different, like you knew it was the same NPC because they had the same name and they kind of generally had the same like personality, but they were like, it was like just a little off, like it felt off from the first session. And I think just like kind of playing with, like on the one hand, like kind of throwing this little like thing to the players, like of, oh yeah, see what I did here, guys, but then like kind of subverting the expectation like immediately thereafter. Like it just created a really good effect. Like it was pretty sharp, and the players really bought into it. Like they bought into it, and they were, as players, it took a certain degree of like, suspension of disbelief. Like they had to act in a way that like didn't acknowledge some of this stuff that like I was kind of throwing out there. And I was super happy they did. I was really happy they kind of embraced that and ran with it. So it felt really, I'm not sure I could have pulled it off with another group, like the group I was playing with. Like I felt like they were, they were being very giving in that way. Like they could tell what I was wanting to do, and they were kind of embraced it. And so it's pretty awesome.
That is very cool. Anything else you want to say?
No,
about
I don't think so. I should mention that I'm not playing the new Cthulhu Dark. I'm still running the beta from like 5 years ago. That's filled with typos and stuff. It works great still. I know there's like a new version. I saw Graham. He had I guess it was a sort of, he had a book of it. Like, I guess it's like a done thing, his like updated version of Cthulhu Dark. I'm going to check that out eventually, but yeah, I just want to throw it out there. And also, I guess I should have said this at the beginning. For anybody who doesn't know, Cthulhu Dark is just a really, really streamlined system for playing Call of Cthulhu mysteries or creating your own Call of Cthulhu style mysteries.
Cool. Thanks, Jason. Lowell, what have you been playing?
Face-to-face, Middle-earth, 13th Age, Mutant Year Zero, action cards. Online, I've played with you, Time and Temp and Masks.
Yep.
Which both are, Mask we wrapped up, and Time and Temp is really, really interesting. And then the other games have been 7th Sea, and then we finished up Dresden Files Accelerated and Mutant City Blues. I did 2 sessions of that with an express set of rules. And then the game I want to talk about, I've only done 1 session of, but I find it very striking. It's a game called Kuro, and now I've done like 3 mystery games back to back on my Thursday nights. So I'm kind of in that mystery mode as well, Jason.
Yeah, I love it. I'm a big mystery guy.
So Kuro advertises itself as a sort of near future, sort of cyberpunk J-horror, Japanese horror game. And depending on how you kind of frame it, I think as a GM, you can make it more cyberpunk or less, or more J-horror or less. It's one of these games that came out of Seventh Circle, the French company. And they did Chin and Keltia and Yggdrasil, and it's one of these English translated games from Modiphius. So the premise is that in 2047, there is a accidental nuclear launch by China, and one of the missiles goes towards Japan, and there's a flash, and it vanishes. And the international community gets up in arms, about this ballistic defense shield. And the Japanese go, we don't know what happened. And so the international community ends up blockading Japan. And this is 6 months after that blockade has started. And since the incident, which is called the Kuro incident, since the missile vanished, and no one knows why, things have gotten stranger. So things are breaking down, political, social, but also there's hints of the supernatural now appearing at the corners. Like it's always been there, but now it's more present. And so you've got this decaying Japan mixed with a kind of weird political social tension mixed with essentially horror tropes. And I just love that combination. It's so odd. Odd.
It is like word salad, or
yeah.
It's like somebody took the story cubes and said, "Yeah, let me come up with an RPG setting." That's really neat.
So, as I said, I think the setting's really interesting because I like horror, because I like the implications of technology. Those are all very cool for me. It's sort of near future, and so it's a little cyberpunk. It can be more Ghost in the Shell style cyberpunk. You can make it higher or lower. One of the great things about it, though, is that, yeah, you might have access to some really cool cyberpunk like prosthetics or whatever, but it's shitty stuff. It's going to break down. This is a society where you guys are on the lower echelons. Things are collapsing. They're wearing out. So there's very much that sense of the real edge, that kind of breakdown, underworld bleed that is one of the elements I really love of good cyberpunk, rather than, hey, we all got super guns and flashy bikes and stuff. I also love Japanese horror. I adore it. It's very different in some ways. There are different ways about intentionality. In Western horror, there seems to be people go and do things. They're motivated by a sort of desires. Whereas in J-horror, things happen. And they just do. You go and do something and an incident occurs. And then you have to figure out how to get around it. And it's weirdly cosmic in some ways. Like, I'll give you my best favorite example of this is, you may have already seen it. There's a movie called Ju-On, which is made in America, remade as The Grudge. And it's a haunted house movie with really interesting time setup and stuff. It scares the absolute shit out of me because it's a haunted house movie. At one point, there's the relative of someone who has been to the haunted house, and she goes back to her apartment. And as she's going up the elevator to her apartment, through the little window thing, you see one of the ghosts. And I'm like, no, that was a haunted house. They can't leave the house. No, that can't happen. And it still freaks me out because this stuff it doesn't have the same adherence to rules, or like if you do something bad things happen to you. No, things just happen. And it's really interesting. But there's some stuff about Japanese storytelling styles that go along with that. I also like the game has a real emphasis. I already mentioned this a little bit, but on hierarchies, there's a real upper echelon of people, these genocrats who have access to cloning technology and stuff, and you don't. And that there's that very much that class divide there. And the occult stuff is at the margins. They've got little occult tech stuff like salt grenades and little hologram things that do wards. These things that people have been trying to cobble together devices and tech to fight against the occult. And I love that little bit to it. So much there. And I enjoyed the session I played. Now that's all about the setting, right? What I'm less sold on is that the game is mechanically heavy in some very strange places. It has 32 specialties for your character. Okay. Ooh. or rather 32 skills.
What?
And then 200 specialties underneath those skills. Including like blast charge positioning is a specialty, legal expertise is a specialty, bioport installation is a specialty.
What does that even mean? I don't even know what that is.
It's crazy. It's very old school in that, and I don't. I mean, obviously you can change that, but it's a weird approach. The game also has a resolution system. You have a stat plus a skill. Your stat, it's usually 1 to 3, gives you're rolling that many d6s, and then you add the value of your skill to that. But when you roll those d6s, if you roll a 4, that's unlucky, so that's a 0. And if you roll a 6, then that explodes. Oh, also, for your various skills, you can get these skill gimmicks. There are 4 different kinds. One of them allows you to reroll 5s. Another one does, you get an extra die. Another one adds to your margin of success. It's kind of crazy, insane, and it bugged me. Sherry actually loved it because she said it felt so weird and arbitrary and out of your control.
It was a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, that's exactly what she said. She says, no, it's perfect for that. There's some other dumb things, like there's different combat maneuvers, and there's clearly an emphasis on combat in the game that is not to my liking. The story scenarios that they have at the back and then in the supplemental books are very linear, a lot of them combat heavy, really unsubtle. So I ignored those completely. And it's weird how much that kind of misses the mark of the original premise that's set up, and that's a little problematic. So those are the things I don't as much care for with it. But the setting is so good. So I think that I would love to either collapse those mechanics down or find something else to run this in, trim it. I think that the setting material and everything is really awesome and worth reading if you're interested in horror or cyberpunk. I'm loving my scenario. I'm borrowing from a J-horror movie called The Vanishing and another movie called Matanga, which is Attack of the Mushroom People, which was a 1960s Japanese movie that scared the hell out of me when I was a kid.
What about Houseu? Should do that one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's the best. So good. But that's the thing is the players, they were in the middle of a riot, and they essentially were all thrown together in the back of a police van. And then another person who was in the police van kind of blew up and covered them with these spores. And that's the inciting incident. They didn't do anything. They just had to. And now they've got to figure out, I mean, they know that this stuff is bad, and they've got to figure out where it came from and how to deal with it and stuff. And the fact that they had to actually burn the police van because a cop got killed in it. And so they've made some choices that were perhaps not optimal. But it's very much, they like it because they're kind of people caught up in this weirdness without having wanted to go into it. And I feel like that's kind of captured that J-horror feeling. I'm digging it.
The setting sounds super interesting to me. I think one of the reasons why a lot of futuristic and science fiction settings leave me cold a little bit is because I just have a love of horror and the occult, and I just like to have a little bit of that in almost everything I play. I mean, I can play games that are not in those settings. Obviously, I do it a fair amount, but I still, like, it just speaks to me, like there's something about that dichotomy of like this like this futuristic setting combined with this like really, really old, Japanese lore, like I just think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Like that speaks to me. And here's the thing, like whatever we might think about the rules, and the rules sound not good, trad is still great for settings. I mean, that's, they still have that, I mean, and if you're willing to, like you said, like to do the work of like collapsing it down or running it in something different, it can be very rewarding.
Yeah, it's definitely worth stripping out. Such good stuff in there.
I think I saw an announcement about Modifius. I read that I think they gave up that license for Kuro and Chin and their Viking game, I think, to another company because they weren't bringing out enough product, and so they relinquished their license.
Oh, I hadn't seen that. I know that they just had a bundle of holding a couple months ago with that stuff. That may have been their attempt to get a little more money out before they dropped it. I know that Kuro's main book has been out of print for a while, though you could get the second and third book. So that was a little irritating.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you wanted to share?
Nah, I'm good, man.
Cool. All right. Well, let's take a break and hear from our sponsor.
This episode of the Gauntlet Podcast is brought to you by our plausibly deniable friends at Nocturnal Media.
This time we're talking about Cold Shadows, narrative espionage role-playing. Cold Shadows had a successful Kickstarter a few months ago, but they've got the backer kit open now, and if anyone's interested in doing pre-orders, they can do that. Cold Shadows is less James Bond and spycraft, and it's much more the John le Carré novels. That's the tagline that grabbed me. I grew up on those. My dad taught international relations, and they had all these novels around with some of the first big adult books I read. Tinker Tailor, Soldier Spy. It really wants to emulate spy stories that are about trust and betrayal and deception and the job of being a spy. So we're getting Graham Greene, some of the Ludlum questions about crosswork and betrayal and so on. And if you've ever seen the really excellent British TV show Sandbaggers, that is amazing look into that life. I've read some stuff about MI6 during this whole period, and it's just fascinating world. Now, this is focused kind of on Cold War feel, but it can be also used for modern games. It's got some elements to just bring that question of, how do we track trust? How do we track cover our assets and so on? They did well enough in the Kickstarter that they have an expansion called Cities in Shadow, which is a cities book for it. It's all based on John Wick's Blood and Honor, which is a samurai role-playing game about the trials and tribulations of being under an authority yet having to do these dangerous things. You can find all of this at coldshadows.backerkit.com. And you'll find a button there for pre-orders. You can get the soft cover of the main book. You can get the soft cover of the Cities in Shadow expansion. They've got dice and token sets there and special story pack cards. And that's going to be open until the end of May. It's a really neat game, and I'm very excited. I backed it in the Kickstarter, and I can't wait to see the final product.
Thanks again to our co-conspirators at Nocturnal Media for supporting the Gauntlet Podcast.
It's giving me life.
Not bad.
That's reasonable.
I'm going to put my own swerve on it now. Jason, what's giving you life?
So the Nintendo Switch, I managed to get my hands on one. I like it a lot. It is. So the Nintendo Switch, I'm certain I don't have to explain this to anybody, but basically it's Nintendo's new console. It's essentially a little tablet with two little snap-on controllers that can be used in different configurations, and you can drop the tablet into a dock and put the game up on your TV. And you can so you can take the game on the go, you can put it on your TV. That works really well. It works so well, you get that feeling of like, how come all video games don't do this? Like, it just feels like such a natural thing to do, like, oh, I'm playing the game in my bed. I'm playing the game like while I'm waiting on, whatever little thing while I'm out and about, like when I'm getting my oil changed. And now I get home and I'm going to play it on my TV. Like it's a intensely compelling way of like consuming video games. It's exactly what I need out of a video game system. The portability and like the sort of like instant pick up and play, but it's still like a console system is really great. This thing is fast. Like you can be like, from the moment you like pick it up, you're like immediately where you were in The Legend of Zelda, like precisely where you were within 3 seconds, I think. Like just a couple of button presses and bam, you're there. I mean, it's just super quick. It's super cool. Pickup. You pick up and play. I mean, like, it's very compelling. Like every time I see it, I want to like just grab it and put in like 10 more minutes, on Zelda. And you can do that. Like it's not a waste of time because you don't have to like load up a bunch of shit to play your game. Having a lot of fun with it so far. It's really, really good. It's kind of like what I need in my life to like get video games done. So it conforms to my lifestyle. So I'm into it. It's giving me life.
It's funny. When my son saw the Nintendo Switch, his first response was, "So when are we getting that?" I'm like, dude, I'm not paying $300 for Zelda. We're going to wait a year until they have a catalog of titles that interest me, and then we'll talk again.
If you are a Zelda fan, it sounds like maybe you're not a big Zelda fan, but like I am, and This game is fucking huge. I listen to podcasts, but listen to Nintendo podcasts now because I'm really caught up in Nintendo shit right now. So this guy, he's put in 130 hours into Breath of the Wild, and his completion percentage is 15. That's fucking nuts. Like, and everyone's just like, "Are you serious?" He's like, "Yeah." And like they did this like spoiler podcast, and like they were each like talking about shit that none of the rest of them had like even seen the whole time they played the game.
Huh.
So it's vast. I mean,
That's pretty
cool. I've never seen a game, so it feels really vast. It feels like mind-bogglingly big. So it's pretty cool.
Cool. You know, I'm going to jump in front of Lowell's because Lowell's is better than mine. So what's giving me life is Cartoon Network recently came out with a season of Justice League Action. Now, these are a series of animated shorts, 12 minutes in length, kind of like the regular show and a lot of the other fare that Cartoon Network puts out now, where it's kind of half an episode. And they are light, but they're not goofy as goofy as Teen Titans. Like each 12-minute episode is completely encapsulated. There's no continuity between the others. There's very few characters that appear from one to the next. Batman's in a bunch of them because DC. I love it. They are using a lot of the quote-unquote back catalog or C-list heroes that I find interesting. Swamp Thing was in a couple of them. Jason Etrigan, the Demon, is in. Zatanna is in several of them. Constantine. Of course, Batman. There's a Firestorm episode, which like tickled me to no end. A Solomon Grundy appearance. It's really, really cool. It's quick. It gets to the point. It tells an entire story. It's whimsical. There are 2 episodes that were just plain silly. One where Batman, Wonder Woman, and I mean it's almost a callback to one of the old Justice League Unlimited, where Batman, Wonder Woman, and Zatanna and yeah, we're all kids. Like they were all changed down into 10-year-olds and they were trick or treating. That was pretty great. And then there was a video game themed episode which was pretty much perfect because it's just good. There were so many good like spoofs of video games, except they got to kind of wink and nod at it because the characters had to exhibit or had to inhabit within the Toyman's video game using of them. It was great. It was great. I love Justice League Action. You could watch all 13 episodes like lickety split because you could just burn through it. I miss Young Justice so bad, but Justice League Action's pretty great. I dig it.
Awesome.
I could tell that. I think you had watched a few there, Lowell.
No,
seemed like it.
Actually, I've watched a bunch of Brave and the Bold back in the day, which was a little bit like that, but this sounds even better.
I don't know, even better. Brave and the Bold was great.
Yeah.
This one's also really, really good. You should definitely check it out. Lowell, what's giving you life?
So people have been talking about changing the Lost because there've been that bundle of holding recently, and I've said it before. It's my favorite setting with my most hated system. And a couple weeks ago, I said, okay, I'm going to finally sit down and write up a hack of Urban Shadows to Changing the Lost. Make a lot of changes, make it very much a Changing the Lost game, but using some of the Urban Shadows mechanics. And I did that, and I was very, very happy with it. And I still am. I think it's great. I'm very excited. I actually might run it for the Gauntlet, try it out, because I love that setting, and I think I've hit the notes. But what was really cool is Tommy Rayburn, like a couple days later, they had been working he was working with somebody else, and I'm going to apologize for not having the name at hand. They were working on a massive World of Darkness, Urban Shadows, sort of, not conversion, but how to use a bunch of the different World of Darkness archetypes with
that PDF
Urban
was
Shadows.
Big too. It was like 200 pages or something.
It's massive.
Yeah.
It's 168 pages.
Yeah, that was John Layton and Tommy Rayburn.
Thank you. The thing that's great about theirs is that they've also they picked and chose from across the Worlds of Darkness. So we've got Orpheus, which is somewhere in between. And then we've got a hybrid of Demon that's sort of old and new. And then we've got vampires from old World of Darkness and hunters from new. And they're all... The thing I find interesting is they said, okay, how do we play these archetypes within Urban Shadows, which I think is a very different thing from saying, okay, how do we take some of those mechanics and make a Demon the Descent game or a Changing the Lost game? And I love that people can go at hacks doing very close to the same thing, but coming at it in very different directions. Because the new Demon from New World of Darkness is very much a supernatural spy game. And so if I were going to like hack that just on its own, I would do something very different. Whereas they take that Demon idea and they put it into Urban Shadows and make it fit within there. Hugely richly done. I think they've done an amazing job with it. Everybody, if they're interested in Urban Shadows or World of Darkness, should check it out. I might even try to run that too, just because I would like to see both of them in action. So that was
Doesn't it
that
feel
was
like
so
the
cool.
theme of our conversation tonight has been cool trad settings that we love, or trad things we love, but let's do them in a system we prefer to play them in. I feel like that's been like a constant throughout tonight. But
Oh yeah.
It is interesting. All right, well, as we come up to the close here, I just wanted to let everybody know, we haven't really talked about it on any of the recent episodes, but this is episode 98, which means that we're right around the corner to an arbitrarily celebration. Like, all podcasts get excited about episode 50 and episode 100, so we're going to do that as well because it's going to be fun. Our plan is to try to reach out to former hosts, and please go to the Google Plus community for the Gauntlet because Jason wants to build like a table of something,
a D100 table of questions, and we're still taking questions. If you find that post on G+, we'll still take your questions. We've got more than 100 on there. I've got a lot of sifting to do, but because most of the questions are pretty good, but some of them are like not quite, like in the spirit.
Some of them are terrible, Rob Bull. Why did you ask the Power 19? Come on, dude, read for content. You're a genius. You made an awesome game that's been on tabletop, and you what? You got some work to do, buddy. You need to put some good questions on there to replace those.
So the idea behind the D100 table is, so we're going to have 100 questions, and the idea came from somebody in our Slack community. I can't remember who it was. I wish I could credit them right now. But what we're going to do is we're going to have this table of questions. We are going to be talking to some people who've been connected to the Gauntlet in various ways leading up to episode 100, which we need to get done in the next couple of weeks. But we're going to have them roll on the table, and whatever question they get, that's the question they're going to answer for the recording. And these are questions that range from like somewhat lighthearted questions, role-playing game related questions, more serious questions, non-role-playing game related questions. We're going to have some guests do it. We are ourselves going to do it. I'm imagining it's going to be us, like maybe as hosts, the main hosts of the show now, maybe doing like 3 or 4 each, a roll and kind of see what we get. Just a fun thing. And then we're also going to share the table with other podcasts who are interested in doing it. So you can help us celebrate 100 episodes. We'd love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
And that brings us to the end of episode 98. We have Lowell at Age of Ravens blog, and he occasionally is on the Play on Target whenever that comes out every, 5 to 6 weeks?
Blue Moon.
Every blue moon. I love it every time it does come out. But that's for Sherry, not you.
Yes.
Lowell, thank you so much for coming on and being our regular host here.
You are more than welcome, Rich.
And Jason, thank you so much for coming on. Now, astute people know that Twitter is actually the Twitter Gauntlet is actually Jason.
My Twitter rate is pretty high at this point, at least relative to where it started. I am up to approximately 3 tweets a day, so pretty good, right? Like averaging 20, sometimes 25 a week. Pretty stoked.
That's pretty good. It's much better than months past. So, yes, way to go, Jason. Cool. Well, thank you guys both so much for coming on. And listeners, thank you so much for your time.